Well, to begin, I have some very good news. I just finished a phone call, Lieutenant Governor and I, with Secretary Price, and he gave me an absolute assurance that our 1332 waiver has been approved and that a letter confirming that will be immediately forthcoming. On that basis, I've told the Department of Commerce and MNsure to go ahead and load into MNsure's system the lower rates from the insurance companies that are dependent upon the 1332 waiver, providing at the insistence of the CMS previously the ability to exercise the reinsurance plan program, which will lower the rates by an average of 20%. So communicated that to the health plans. Consider that matter resolved based on the assurances of the Secretary, and so we'll proceed accordingly. I have a statement here regarding the mediation. I thank our mediator, former Judge Rick Solum, for his concerted efforts over the past 2 days to help the legislature and our administration negotiate a settlement of the issues that have divided us. For the past 4 months, I've advocated for just such a negotiated agreement. I've said repeatedly that my reason for exercising my constitutional line item veto of some of the legislature's biannual appropriation was to require them to revise their 2017 tax bill, which I believe will seriously jeopardize Minnesota government's future financial stability. Republican leaders have said repeatedly that the reason for their lawsuit was to provide them with sufficient funds to operate in this biennium. I was not surprised by the intransigence of Republican legislative leaders during this attempted mediation. But the reason for their intransigence was a surprise. They have now revealed that they already have more than enough money to operate both the House and the Senate at their projected levels of spending until they reconvene in session next January. Their cash surplus contradicts the high drama they have been manufacturing during the past 4 months. Just today, one of their members asserted, quote, "The governor used his line item veto power to eliminate funding for the legislature, effectively abolishing the legislative branch." Their current cash position also contradicts the assertions made in their filing with the Minnesota Supreme Court this past week. It stated, quote, "Assuming the House and Senate spend as anticipated through October 1st, 2017, and only begin using their carry-forward funds thereafter, the anticipated date carry-forward funds will be exhausted is as follows: House, after payment of payroll on February 1st, 2018, Senate after payment of payroll on December 1st, 2017. However, this statement fails to disclose what Republican legislative leaders have known, or should have known, for some time. In addition to their carry-forward funds, they have stated they will use the Legislative Coordinating Commission's biannual carry-forward monies of over $3.6 million an appropriation of over $35 million to completely fund their expected operating expenses until they return to session next year. They admit their legislative counsel has advised them that they can do so. Republican leaders have claimed repeatedly that they had to file their lawsuit and cost taxpayers several $100,000 in legal fees to prevent the legislature from being, quote unquote, abolished by my vetoes depriving them of operating funds. Now, after the court forced their financial disclosure, we learn their claim is untrue. They owe the people of Minnesota and the Minnesota Supreme Court an honest explanation of why they have dragged all of us into their costly theatrics over the past 4 months. And you have an attachment which is prepared by MMB, which details their own stated projected expenditures over the next months until they reconvene in February, and also the funds that are available to them. And as you can see, it leaves them with a hefty surplus. Be glad to respond to questions. And there be no questions.
Did you walk out of this session?
I was angry. I told them, in my 40 years dealing with Minnesota government, I have never, ever been lied to. And I don't use that word lightly, but I've never been lied to, and the people of Minnesota have been lied to, and the Supreme Court's been lied to about the predicament that my veto supposedly put the legislature in. And they did that knowingly. And that infuriates me, because it deeply offends me, because it just violates all the principles on which I've tried to conduct myself in public life, which is to be honest and straightforward, and to carry this on for 4 months and subject taxpayers to several $100,000 in legal fees when they've known, and whatever point they can say for themselves, but if they can manage their financial affairs responsibly, they would have known shortly after the beginning of this fiscal year that they had the monies available to them. And they've carried this on and made assertions even today how I'm abolishing the legislature, how they have a right to exist. Of course they have a right to exist. I mean, everybody learns in, I don't know, 3rd grade or so about the co-equal branches of government. I have complete respect for that. It's not about that. It's about the coming back to the table and doing what's important for the people of Minnesota, which is negotiate financial stability for the future of our state. And I will bring that forward in the next legislative session and push it forcefully there.
So, Governor, let me make sure I have this straight. So you walked out because there's no reason to keep negotiating since they can keep operating through February and there's no leverage left for you?
Well, they didn't offer anything meaningful in terms of the 5 proposals. We spent all day yesterday and all day this morning quibbling about what changes could be made to the taxes, particularly the CI tax, under certain circumstances of, well, if there's a projected deficit, if the projected deficits exceed 100 million or 50 million, and you know, we were just going round and round on that, but every time we said to the mediator, well, you know, we have 5 issues here. What is their response? We got back through the mediator. They weren't interested in discussing or considering the others. So I mean, I made a statement of fact, and I was upset, and I was angry, and I told them why. I've never, ever, ever, in my 40 years in government, seen this kind of duplicity and the consequences of it for taxpayers, for all the drama that's been going on for all this time when they knew, contrary to what they said, that they have enough money available to operate at their own stated level of expenditures until the next legislative session, when they can appropriate the money again, override my veto, and proceed. So this has just been a farce. And yeah, I'm deeply, deeply offended, and I don't think I stormed out. I was angry at them. I expressed my anger. The mediator himself has issued a statement saying that we were at an implacable impasse. And I just finally said, enough of a sham.
So there's no reason to continue because they don't need to offer anything because they can keep operating until they override you in February?
That's why they haven't offered. That's why, in my judgment, they didn't offer anything, because they have no need to. And they had no need to undertake the lawsuit and drag us through all these 4 months of this charade, knowing, as they should have, if they have any competence in their financial management, what their financial situation was, which they wouldn't disclose, which they don't require themselves to disclose, as the executive branch and the judicial branch are required to do, until the Supreme Court ordered them to do so. Or we still wouldn't have this information.
Do you hope the court rules, or do you think that that's moot because of the financial position they're in?
I can't say what the court should do or not do. We'll file, our 2 attorneys will file a statement to the court as they've requested, explaining the facts of this, so we're at an implacable impasse, and then that's the court's domain.
Now stands, your veto has been ruled invalid, and that standing hasn't changed. The court didn't order.
I mean, that's again for the court to determine. I mean, I'm not going to prejudge what they're going to decide to do or not do.
Other questions?
Governor, have you talked with Democrats? If this comes to a veto override, would they be able to override your veto of legislative funding next session?
I expect they would. I expect the legislature will want to, secure their funding for the balance of the biennium, and I haven't thought about how I'd respond. Depends on what they attach to the bill. For once we get a clean bill on a single subject, as the Constitution requires, I'll look at it accordingly. We'll see what else they load it up with.
Governor, can you honestly say you were surprised that they wouldn't give in? They've said all along they weren't willing to move from their position.
I wasn't surprised. I said here I wasn't surprised by their intransigence. I was surprised by their clear lack of any incentive to do so, and the reason being because contrary to what they've been saying for 4 months, they have the money. They know they have the money to operate till next February. All this talk about how I was abolishing the legislature is just untrue.
You were in there for 10 or 11 hours, and you say that you guys only discussed the CI, or what else is put out there? I mean, doesn't the public deserve to know what was each side offered in good faith or not?
Well, the mediator, and I think he was trying to get us to first base, focused on the tax, and it wasn't just the CI, but his focus was on that, was what would the circumstances be that would cause the legislature and the administration to, we said, undo the tax, part of the tax bill, and they stressed reduce spending. And we went back and forth on that and what the trigger point would be, and was it this biennium or the future biennium, and back and forth. And that was, those are honest disagreements. Those are frankly matters that the next legislative session needs to address. But, then we came back mid-morning and said, even if we got this resolved, and I think it would take some time, and from the written statement of other legislators today, they're not interested in any equivocation whatsoever, no matter what the leaders, and the leaders only don't have the authority to make a deal on behalf of the legislature. They just have something that they would take to the members, but we've seen in the past the members have overridden that. So, that's as far as we went. We put forward. Again, this morning, we want to discuss all 5 items, and got a clear indication from the mediator that they weren't interested in considering driver's licenses or teacher licensure. And we didn't, as I say, really get into the details of the estate tax or the cigarette tax.
Governor, had you known that the legislature had these separate pools of money that it could tap into to get through into the next session, would you have vetoed their budget?
Well, there's no way I could have known that then. I mean, that's a hypothetical. They claim they didn't know until whenever. They had responsible fiscal management. If their budgets were administered by the Department of Management and Budget, like the executive branch, like the judicial branch, they would have factual information readily available. You have to ask them what they knew and when they knew it. I can't answer that. I just know until the court required them to disclose their surplus as they're carried forward, and then MMB was able to deduce from the actual spending there, and again from their own statement to the court of what their projected expenditures were for their regular level of operation for the next 6 months until we go to the legislative session. Until those disclosures were made and really required by the court, I mean, I didn't have the information to judge accordingly.
Any questions?
As Brian's pointed out, the public was kept out of this. Can you describe what it was like for the last 14 hours? Were you two in separate rooms?
Yeah.
Were you with Democratic lawmakers and they were with Republican? Who was in the room?
Well, I can't say what was their configuration, but again, it's the legislature. They're different, so we didn't till the very last meeting meet directly with legislators, Democrats or Republicans. In my group were Lieutenant Governor and Commissioner France, Commissioner Bowerly, senior staff, MMB staff, communications staff, who am I leaving out? We had about 15 people, and it was very, very civil. I mean, the mediator, we didn't see each other. The mediator went back and forth, and he did an outstanding job. And he was, very respectful of both sides, and so we were equally respectful back. We had quite a bit of time waiting while he was negotiating with them, as they had to wait while he was negotiating with us. And fortunately, everybody had their computers and their tweets and everything else, so it was sometimes very quiet in our room. But people were engaged, and we just waiting it out. And then they wanted to have a meeting face to face, and first they wanted to have just the Republican legislative leaders in the meeting with us, and I said no, we'd only meet with the DFL leaders also included, so they were included, and that was the final meeting.
So, Governor,
Aaron, did you?
What's that?
Same question. Thanks.
Where does this go from here? If it's back in the hands of the courts, is there any avenue for you to get a win out of the courts? And if not, would you consider dropping your appeal?
I'm not going to drop the appeal. I mean, this changes the complexion of it because, again, I'm not going to prejudge or speculate on what the court's going to order, but, it turns out they have enough money. Again, their whole premise of this has been, we have to do this. We have to go to the court to get the money to be able to function until we get back in session. And the fact is they have that amount of money. I don't think the court's going to take it away from them. So they have the money. I don't know what the court's going to do. But I know that they shown they had no incentive or no reason to capitulate on anything because their stated reason for even considering negotiation was because they wanted to restore the money necessary for them to function. So they wouldn't be, quote unquote, abolished. And it turns out they've known for some time that they had the money to do so. So, in the next session, I will bring forward the items that I've brought forth in my reasons for my line on veto, because I believe the fiscal stability of the state is at risk for the future, and I want to leave a legacy of a kind of solid financial stability that I didn't inherit and that I want to bequeath to my successor. And I'll pursue that in the next legislative session.
The majority leader said just shortly ago that you had agreed to every item in the tax bill, and so why would they renegotiate when you now have the power because you vetoed their funding? Had you agreed to the CI and the estate tax and the other issues?
I signed the bill because the poison pill said that I would abolish the funding for the Department of Revenue if I didn't sign the tax bill.
But had you told them that you would sign it?
I didn't know, we didn't know it was in the tax bill. Commissioner Bowerly negotiated with the tax leaders, right up literally until the final morning. I was on the phone with Senator Gazelka at 2 o'clock in the morning on the final morning. I mean, this thing was, their session was in chaos, and they were scrambling, as often does happen during the regular session, but this was a special session, and they stuck the poison pill measure in the appropriation bill, and they knew that they'd done it, and leaders have confessed that they knew it, so they snuck one past us, and the tax bill, as I said before, had many features that I support, and given that there was no option reasonably except given the difficulty we've had getting a special session, to try to get a special session to refund the Department of Revenue is not something I could be optimistic about. So, I made that decision. It seemed like the best and really the only option. And we didn't know what was in the tax bill for the next biennium. They didn't know what was in the tax bill for the next biennium because the Department of Revenue kept changing it until the night before they passed the bill, and the Department of Revenue didn't have the facts of the bill to be able to do their assessment until the beginning of the following week. So, I mean, they passed the tax bill knowing with their numbers of what it was going to be in the tax bill for this the current biennium. And they backloaded, what was it, $80 million into this one from the future to try to reduce the ongoing cost. But they didn't know what the ongoing cost was. And it was only when we got that information after I had to sign the bills that we realized the dire straits they'd put the state in.
Governor, is there anything about the new financial information that raises any legal questions? I mean, in your opinion or your lawyers, do you want the court to know about this? Is there some kind of a extra brief to be filed?
I asked the attorneys that. The court's asked only to us to disclose, communicate to them by September 30th the outcome of the attempted mediation, which the mediator and the two attorneys will do, and I assume that they'll reach an agreement on a brief factual statement. The court has not requested any other filings or information, and so, you know, that's, again, their prerogative. But, I mean, I hope they'll become aware of this, because I think, as I say, they should, I'm not going to say what they should do. I would think they would want to know why the brief that they got filed even this week didn't represent the full truth.
Given how this is gone, is there any reason to hope that anything can be accomplished in the next session?
Well, that's a very good question. You know, we were all elected by the people of Minnesota to serve the people of Minnesota, and you know, we can have our honest differences. That's why I'm deeply offended by this. I've been doing this process for 40 years. I expect people to disagree with me. I don't even agree with myself all the time. You know, we have a forum for those kind of debates, and if people have honest disagreements or differences, that's the process. But that's, you know, and that's what I will try to work out in the next legislative session. But that also presumes that people are all dealing honestly. And I've been involved in this long enough to know that that's not going to happen all the time, but it should be in preponderance what is guiding everybody. And if you believe in your position, you know, you should be perfectly willing to state publicly what your position is and defend it, and you know, withstand the criticism and withstand the disagreements and the like. So this kind of duplicity is, well, if you want to come listen to my business partnership speech next Tuesday, you've gotten a brief preview.
Governor, on your conversation with Secretary Price, did you get any clarity on whether the Minnesota Care money will be as expected or reduced as you had feared?
Well, I didn't press that because I wanted to get to 1332. He made a oblique reference to 1331, but I don't know what the content of his letter is, what it will say. You know, I've consulted with the lawyers who now work elsewhere who wrote that statute and the rule that's being applied, and they say the administrator of CMS absolutely has the discretion to decide whether to provide that money in addition to the 1332. And that's why the CMS staff, in good faith, were advising us last spring how to write the bill so that money would be coming forward. So that's a debate discussion for a future week. The main thing now is to get the 1332 definitively approved so we can proceed on October 2nd, which they'll be able to do, and MNsure is loading, Commerce is provided MNsure now with the lower rates, and those will be reflected in October 2nd. And we're doing everything we possibly can to conduct this open enrollment period as smoothly as possible, and MNsure is in a position to do so. And so this turbulence has been unsettling, but as far as the public is concerned, these rates will be lower, the rates that were previously reported because of the reinsurance, and we'll proceed accordingly thereafter.
Okay. Governor, I understand you instructed your commissioners not to participate in the MNLARS hearing in Wilmer on Monday. Could you talk about
Well, they participated in one, I don't know how long was that hearing, 3 hours, whatever, in St. Paul, and provide all the information, and I respect Representative Baker, and I found him a good person to deal with, but he's not even on the committee. I mean, I can't justify their taking the time and the expense of the taxpayers of going out there to repeat what they said in the hearing. They were grilled in the hearing, and I mean, I just don't see any justification. If they're trying to be reasonable with their expenses, so they'll have enough money to last till next February, the place to start would be some of these extraneous hearings and trips and luxury apartments that they rent for months when they don't even use them, and furniture allowances. And if they want to, operate some measure of fiscal responsibility that they keep imposing on the judicial and executive branches, they could start with, and should start with themselves. Yeah. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Everybody ready? All right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I wish very sincerely that we were mediating right now our differences with the governor, but unfortunately the governor has cut off mediation, and frankly was not happy and decided that he was going to walk out. So it's not the first time that he's done that on us, and my guess is this probably won't be the last, but that's part of dealing with people that you don't always agree with, and sometimes we have to agree with or work with people that we don't always agree with the way that they deal with other people as well, and unfortunately that's the situation we're in. So the mediation we thought was difficult. Obviously the issues that we're dealing with are difficult. The reason that we were in mediation was very simple. The governor line item vetoed the funding for the legislature. That basically is seen by us as an attempt to eliminate the legislature. Very plain and simply, I don't know that you can even interpret it any other way. We took him to court to restore the funding for our staff and our members, to make sure that people had a voice here at the Capitol in the legislature. The lower court ruled favorably with us, decided that the legislature should be funded. They overturned the governor's line item veto, and the governor decided to appeal that to the Supreme Court. The court then ordered us into mediation. So it was the governor's action that got us here, and unfortunately the governor is the one who has cut this off. So we're disappointed in his action. Unfortunately, he's decided to end it, but that's his decision. We will certainly continue to talk with him at any time and in any place to resolve these issues that we know are important to Minnesotans. As far as the legislative funding, I think we will continue. We consider ourselves to be in survival mode. The governor has literally eliminated our funding. The court has given us funding through October 1st. We do have some reserves that we can use beyond that. We will look at any other option to make sure that people have a voice here at the Capitol in their elected representatives. We feel very strongly about upholding Minnesotans' constitutional right to 3 branches of government. So we will look at any and all means necessary to continue to have a functioning legislature here at the state capitol, despite the governor's efforts to prevent that, what seems like today, at all costs. And his anger today really seemed to be, it was disappointing, and I know we all get frustrated once in a while, but today was the governor's day to get frustrated, I guess. But it seemed today like he was frustrated that he didn't successfully completely eliminate the legislature. And I find that to be very troubling and very disappointing. So I'll let Senator Gazelka make a few comments, and then we'll take some questions.
I listened to the governor's speech before us here, and his first comment was about getting the waiver approved, and I think that was a big deal. And I bring that up to say that was the beginning of session where we were actually working together, and that's why we wanted to do mediation. In the end, if the courts weren't going to completely rule in our favor and instead ask us to mediation, that was the opportunity to again set us on a path of working together. And so that's what we set out to do. We offered a number of offers, a number of things that we tried to work through, but they really were focused on how do we move forward from here. Some of the things that the governor wanted to negotiate, we'd already negotiated. We all had agreed to, we'd all signed, and we went back on our notes and we found that the governor absolutely said he would support the tax bill as is on Saturday evening before the end. And so it would have been a shock to us had he not signed that bill. And so that's where we're on that. But I also wanted to mention that both mediation and both why we sued in the first place was the governor can't defund the House and Senate. That's the issue. The issue is not how far we can run. We have a 2-year budget that we have to have funding all the way till 2019, July of 19. So that's the issue for us, is you can't defund the House and Senate, just like you cannot defund the judicial branch. And in the first court case before Guthman, the Judge Guthman asked his attorney, well, could you then defund the courts? And the answer was yes. And we just flat out disagree with that. And so we moving forward, you know, we will continue. We hoped we would continue negotiation, but that did end abruptly because that would be the way that we move forward. There's too many big issues that we have to work on. We can't, if you allow the legislative branch to be crippled, we cannot function the way that we want to function and need to function. We don't know yet what's going to go on with the HHS, the federal, what they're going to do with us. We don't know, but we know that we need to be fully functioning. So today's a big disappointment for me. I was very optimistic that we could find a way through, but when it ended, it appeared that it didn't, and so now our hope is that the courts will rule as soon as possible. We hope they rule in our favor that you cannot defund the House and Senate.
It seems to me that what set the governor off was the fact that somebody told him, you can keep operating up until the session in late February of 2018, and so he essentially has no leverage left.
I think that's probably accurate. I certainly asked them, I mean, are you surprised that we weren't going to look for every option to make sure that people still had a voice here at the Capitol? And I think the bottom line is that's what made the governor mad today, that he hadn't successfully eliminated us. And frankly, that's not what Minnesotans expect this place to operate like. They expect you to roll up your sleeves and work with people, even when you disagree, to try to get to the bottom and solutions that Minnesotans really can wrap their arms around. And sometimes compromise is difficult, and compromise is particularly difficult for this governor. But we're committed to continuing to work towards compromise that we think is in the best interest of Minnesotans, and we will do that. As far as the funding for the LCC, the governor has known about that money. In fact, he said publicly early on in this process that he hadn't completely eliminated the legislature because there was still some funding for the legislature. And what he meant by that was that he hadn't line item vetoed the LCC money. That LCC money is one option on the table for us, but it does not come without a cost. That money was appropriated to pay the joint staff between the House and the Senate. And if we take that money from the second year of the biennium and use it to fund the House and the Senate for the first year, it now brings a level of uncertainty for those employees employed by the LCC into the mess with the rest of us. And if we can't find a solution to this, if the court doesn't rule in our favor and we can't find a solution, potentially it means hundreds of more people now getting laid off because they don't have the funding. But we very strongly believe that we need to take take advantage of every resource we have available to us to make sure that Minnesotans do have their voice here at the Capitol.
Yeah, I want to answer a little more of that too, because the House and Senate have different carry forward numbers as far as what we have available. In June was the first time that we worked with MMB, the governor's branch, about what kind of dollars that the Senate had. And at that time, we showed that we had around $4 million available of carry forward. That, starting July 1, would not have ever gotten us to next session. Again, the numbers change. The fiscal year is July 1. MMB worked with us just within the last few weeks, together with our staff, and the number was about $6 million. So there was no deception there from MMB or from us. We were just taking the numbers that we had to come to a conclusion. Take that and move us to October 1 instead of July 1, and we can get farther down the road with extreme measure. But saying that, it still does not fund us to the end of our budget cycle into the following year. So no matter what, no matter how you cut it, we don't have the resources and we are defunded.
Could you talk a little bit more about the extreme measures we might expect? And if you're using every means available, how come your attorneys said last week or the week before that the court shouldn't fund you even though you asked them to fund you back in
That was
July?
simply a response to, do we believe the court can appropriate money? And we do not. We believe that's the legislature's job to appropriate the money. The governor himself cannot appropriate money. That's what he needs us for. That's why I'm so confused as to why he wants to eliminate us. He can't run the state of Minnesota without us. We're necessary. And we just think it's a lot easier if he'd roll up his sleeves and work with us. Yes, we're going to disagree from time to time, but gosh, this isn't that difficult. I want to say, too, there's been some discussion about the 5 items and whether or not the governor had agreed to those in the tax bill. I think he's been very careful about his response to that, but there's no question that the governor agreed to every one of those. And I will say the governor, through the negotiations, seems obsessed with tax increases. It was the only option that he would throw on the table, was a permanent tax increase that could be triggered by the executive branch if there was even $1 deficit in the November forecast. And permanent tax increases, ongoing permanent tax increases. So, I want to remind people that if we do get into a deficit situation, it will not be because we did a small amount of tax relief this session. The tax revenue from last biennium to this biennium, even with the tax reductions that we made, was still an increase of $2.571 billion. From this biennium to the next biennium, it will still be projected to be $3.265 billion. That's even after our tax reductions. The governor needs to understand that the taxes aren't the problem here. It's the level of spending at the state of Minnesota. And this governor doesn't seem to want to admit that spending beyond the inflation of a family's budget and beyond our ability and current tax revenues is what's causing the problems in the state of Minnesota. We're going to continue this conversation, I'm sure, when we get the November forecast. But as far as the governor not agreeing to the tax bill, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to do it because I think it's important that everybody is held accountable and held to their word here at the Capitol. This is a text message that was sent, and I'm going to give you the exact date and time, on Wednesday, May 24th at 6:29 p.m. This is a text message from the governor's chief of staff to my chief of staff and to the senator's chief of staff. And it's a conversation about what bills had been approved and signed off on and were ready to send to the floor to be passed. This is a direct quote of the text message. This is Jamie Tincher saying this. "These are the ones that are done, period. No changes, not even technical corrections. Ag, public safety, E12, higher ed, and taxes." The governor absolutely agreed to every provision that was in the tax bill personally himself, and his staff signed off that the bill was ready to be passed. I understand that he may have had some disagreement or second thoughts after some level of remorse, but if there's one thing that needs to be good around the Capitol, it's your word. And the governor agreed to these things, which actually I hesitate to even tell you all of this because it's irrelevant. After he agreed and after we passed them, our governor signed these bills into law, and now he wants to change his mind. I'm sorry, you don't get to do that. And we will have another session that starts next February 20th, and we can take up all these issues again. But you gave your word, you signed the bills, they became law. Minnesotans are expecting that. If this tax bill got vetoed, it means that cities would not have gotten their LGA increases. It means that silver shovel that the governor was putting into the ground up at Digi-Key and Thief River Falls last week would not have happened. And I know that the governor intended to veto that tax bill because he has said it. But he has no problem going to Thief River Falls and putting that shovel in the ground and taking credit for that. You can't have it both ways. The governor agreed to all of this. It was good policy. He signed it. It's done. In hindsight, what he has done is absolutely unconstitutional. We maintain that position. We're going to ask the court and continue to ask the court to provide the legislative funding, which we know is right. If they do not do that, we will look at other means, but everything's going to be on the table. And we feel like we owe that to the voters that sent us here.
Provide the legislative funding by sticking with the Ramsey County decision, or provide it by asking the court to fund you as you did a few months ago?
Just upholding the lower court's decision.
And on extreme measures? You thought I forgot?
No, I never thought you forgot. Extreme measures, what I'll say is right away, We had a mostly travel ban for all the senators. We put a hiring freeze out, so we weren't replacing anybody. So we were already limiting the staff that we had. But going forward, we need to make sure that we get well into the February 20th and beyond, because you don't just pass a bill. It takes a while to get there. If the governor vetoes it, we actually have to have bipartisan support. We have 34 Republican senators. We have to override a veto with 45 votes. So I don't just assume that's going to happen in this case. And so we're going to look at everything. You know, we have to look at our staff. We have to look at all of our payments on everything that we do to make sure that we get beyond that time. But no matter what, we don't have money to get all the way into the following July.
Mr. Speaker, have you talked to Democratic leadership about an override of the governor in February, and how likely is that to happen?
You know, I have had initial conversations with them about that. I won't you can ask them directly, I guess, if you'd like to know what their opinion is on an override. I actually don't think we get there. I think it's pretty obvious that the first bill out of the chute, the next legislative session, will be a bill funding the legislature. My guess is the governor's going to sign that. Now, I've been wrong, because I've predicted many times now that the governor was going to realize he had a losing hand and just kind of lay down and say, you know, enough's enough. I lost this battle. Let's move on. But, you know, when I think about why people get frustrated with why St. Paul doesn't work, or why Washington, D.C. doesn't work, this was an incredibly productive session. I think the most productive session in 20 or 30 years. We got so much done. From tax relief to roads and bridges to real ID. I mean, there's just so many things. Sunday liquor sales. We got so much accomplished. And all of that's getting lost in this little squabble over the governor having some small amount of remorse. And in all of that, he's citing that he believes the future fiscal state of the state's going to be in trouble because we did a small amount of tax relief. When I've already showed you that the projected numbers of revenue from this biennium to the next, even including that tax reduction, are still an increase of $3.265 billion. By the way, that number doesn't include any carry forward from the previous biennium, so the spendable amount of money is actually far greater than that. For some reason, he wants to hold up immediately things that aren't going to be a problem for 4 or 6 years from now, if ever. And I don't see that they ever will be. The problem is the governor wants to probably continue spending at a rate beyond a 10% per budget clip. That's not sustainable. That's what's going to put us in a deficit situation. And I can only glean from his actions that's what he's up to. But the spending is very clearly the problem.
Speaker, if the legislature is in survival mode for funding, why are there so many committee meetings going on in the last few weeks?
Well, we haven't been in survival mode until right now. The legislature has a duty to be responsive to the electorate. We have committee hearings. We're not going to stop working because we're in survival mode. We're going to continue doing the work that Minnesotans sent us here to do, and that is having open and transparent committee meetings. You know, the governor keeps wanting us to go behind closed doors to work out some sort of deal using some unconstitutional leverage. That's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. We want to conduct the business of Minnesotans in open, transparent public hearings, and we're going to continue doing that even over the interim. Now, we're going to put some things in place to slow down the level of spend at the legislature to preserve our dollars as long as we can, because our priority is going to be on our staff and our members and on the operation and function of making sure that Minnesotans have that voice in the legislature here at the Capitol. That's the core function of the legislature, and that's what we're going to focus our efforts on.
Can you add some detail to what you're going to be doing?
It'll be things. I think we actually put out a memo out of the House some months ago, and then we retracted it after the lower court's decision. Look to that memo. Those will be the things that go back into place. It'll be less per diems. It'll be less travel, travel restrictions, those sorts of things. We're going to go down to the core stuff. But there is, I want everybody to understand, there is a realistic possibility that this could include furloughs and layoffs. We do not have enough money, even with the LCC money, to operate the legislature for 2 years. So, you know, I know that the governor is just angry today because he didn't successfully eliminate the legislature thus far, but frankly, we disagree with him so strongly, and we're going to fight to make sure that people have their voice here at the Capitol. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure that continues to happen.
I want to answer the question about committees because, for example, MNLARS is a total mess, and so we wanted to make sure that we had committees to hear about that. Capital safety is something where they're supposed to meet twice a year, and things have changed. Many capitals have much more security than us. We had one on terrorism because we want to know what's going on. To suddenly say we're not going to have any committee hearings or not going to have any tours to see what's going on out throughout Minnesota is a mistake. That's where legislation comes from, and so it's very important to do.
But you're not doing bonding tours, Senjum announced. So some committees have.
Yeah, Senator Senjum said until we get this resolved, we're not going to do bonding tours. That's his call. He's the chair. We want to get through this. We hope the courts make a decision soon, but that is an area that is impacted.
And when did that start? Because bonding tours have already been going on.
On the Senate side, that decision was within just the last couple weeks.
Okay, but several have already happened, so those expenses, we were there.
Yep, glad you were there.
Senate was on it, yeah.
Other questions? What kind of proposals did you make in these mediation sessions that, you know, obviously didn't touch on these 5 items that the governor raised?
You know, we actually talked about some of the 5 items. Obviously, we didn't like that, but we wanted to show that we were open to at least talking and try to show some progress. And frankly, my impression, and I'll let the senator talk too, was that there was much more give and take on our side, and the other side just seemed really intent on wanting a tax increase, a permanent tax increase. In fact, an inflator reinstated that would just continue to increase over time, regardless of whether we needed it or not. I mean, it was just kind of you know, it seemed like an obsession about having to make sure that we had more tax revenue coming in. And you know, the data to me doesn't show that there's a problem. And for me, I really tried to structure my thought in the mediation with what is the problem right now and what's the problem we're trying to solve. Obviously, the number one problem was that the governor line item vetoed the legislature. We don't have funding. But beyond that, there's been some constitutional questions. If he is worried about the fiscal shape of the state of Minnesota, we only need to worry about that until February 19th, because on February 20th, all of the you know, the wisdom that's contained in our state constitution has decided that we're going to have a regular session of the legislature, and we're going to deal with that the same way that we deal with those situations for 150 years. We're going to deal with it in legislative session. So we didn't need to deal with anything beyond February 20th. We'll have an opportunity to do that. The great part about that is we will have 2 more forecasts to have more information and be more informed when we're making those decisions. And we can do it during the legislative process when it's open and transparent. But the governor obviously wanted to get, you know, some sort of tax increase reinstated immediately. And I don't exactly know why, because the data that I have doesn't show that we need it.
Yeah, a couple things that we tried to work on. The first one was, okay, if fiscal stability is important to the governor, is there a way that we can find to solve that moving forward? But every time we looked at it, we were reminded that right now we have a system in place. If we're short, our reserves come in and kick in the difference. And we have $1.6 billion of reserves that are there in case we have a shortfall. But we were trying to explore a number of avenues along that line. In the end, that kind of broke up. The other thing that we looked at is, can we agree on some things moving forward? Can we look to Minnesota's future together for the things that we have to do and find that as the way to win? And we didn't get any traction there. We never did get to another area that I think we would have explored, and that is there a way to make sure that there's not shutdowns in the future? And we may explore that during session. How do we stop that? But in the end, we just couldn't get to any place. I didn't feel like we really got much back from the executive branch, but they really wanted those 5 issues, and we felt like those had been negotiated in good faith and agreed to during the regular and special session.
Was this an odd experience, or did it feel like you were back in the legislative?
You know the movie Groundhog Day? No, it was, I haven't been through a mediation ever, and our attorneys and the mediator basically said they've never really experienced something like this. But it is important that we get it right. In the end of the day, we have to have the three branches of government all having the authority that they were given. And so that was my main thing to our attorney, and that I would say to the mediator. I said, in the end, I want to make sure that the legislative branch has all the power they are meant to have, and that's worth fighting for. I think that's important for Minnesota, and it really isn't just this governor and this legislative branch and this judicial court. It's 5 years from now, 10, 20, 50 years from now. It's important that we get it right. And so I'm optimistic in that regard that we will get it right.
Other questions? Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.